During my night shift, they brought in a little girl, unconscious, badly hurt. I started treatment. Then I saw her face. She was my daughter. My wife said she was safe, but she was with him. I called her 20 times. No answer. When my daughter woke up, she whispered, "Dad, Mom did this." But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Darren Cole had never been the kind of man who needed recognition. He didn't want plaques on the wall or pats on the back. He wanted the mortgage paid on time. He wanted Lila's lunch packed the night before so she didn't have to rush in the morning. He wanted Nadia to stop looking at him like he was furniture, though he hadn't admitted that part yet, not even to himself. He'd built his life the way he built everything, slow, careful, piece by piece. He'd grown up in a house where love was expressed through function. Dinner on the table, bills paid, the car maintained, problems handled quietly. His father had been that kind of man, too. Not poetic, not demonstrative, but present. Reliable in the way a load-bearing wall is reliable. You don't notice it until it's gone. Darren had watched his father work himself into the ground for a family that didn't always say thank you. And somewhere in his late teens, he'd made himself a quiet promise. He would do the same. He would show up. He would not complain. He would not ask to be seen. That promise had served him well, mostly. It had gotten him through nursing school, through the early brutal years of floor work, through the stretch when he and Nadia were young and broke, and the apartment was small, and the winters seemed to last 9 months. He'd been under the weight sometimes, but he hadn't broken. What the promise hadn't accounted for was what happened when the person you were showing up for stopped noticing you were there. Toledo, in early November, had that particular weight to it, the kind of cold that settled into the concrete and didn't let go until April. The hospital was warm and antiseptic smelling, the way it always was, and Darren moved through it with the practiced ease of a man who had spent 11 years learning its rhythms. He was a trauma nurse, not a surgeon, but on a floor like his, the distinction blurred some nights. You read people. You had to. Panic, pain, deception. He learned to see all three quickly. He knew how a body looked when it was telling the truth and how it looked when someone was trying to manage the information. That Tuesday started like 100 before it. He ate half a sandwich at the nurse's station at 9, standing up, barely tasting it. His co-worker Denise was writing notes on a chart nearby, complaining about the new scheduling software with the resigned persistence of someone who had been complaining about it for 3 months and had accepted that complaining was now simply part of her routine. The overhead lights hummed. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped in its steady mechanical rhythm. The cleaning cart squeaked past the far end of the corridor and disappeared around a corner. He checked the board. 2 incoming from the west side. An auto accident. Middle-aged man, possible broken ribs, conscious and agitated. And a pediatric fall. Female, 8 years old. He didn't think twice about the pediatric case. Falls happened. Kids were fearless in the particular way of someone who hasn't yet fully understood that the ground is hard. He'd stitched up more young knees than he could count, and he'd learned to stay calm no matter how dramatically the parents presented, because alarm in a nurse's face could make a child's pain spike in real time. He was arranging a tray in bay for when the paramedics came through the double doors, and something in his body registered the information before his mind fully did. A kind of stillness dropped over him. The particular stillness that wasn't calm, but was its opposite, the stillness of everything going very quiet just before something breaks. He looked up. The girl on the gurney was small, wrapped in a thin jacket, her dark hair matted against the left side of her face. Her eyes were closed. There was dried blood near her left temple and a bad scrape along her chin. She looked breakable in the way all children look breakable. All surface, no armor. He knew that jacket. He'd bought it at the end of the school year on sale, navy blue, and she had spotted it on the rack and pointed to the small white star embroidered near the collar with absolute certainty. That one. That's the one. He'd bought it without negotiating because you didn't negotiate with that kind of certainty. Lila. The word came out of him like air from a punctured tire. Flat. Involuntary. He crossed the room in 4 steps and gripped the edge of the gurney. The young paramedic was reading from his notes, and Darren caught pieces of it the way you catch pieces of a radio through interference. 8-year-old female. Found at the base of the back porch steps. Neighbor called it in. No adult present at the scene when they arrived. His hands moved before his thinking caught up. He checked her pulse. He lifted her eyelid gently with his thumb, pupils responsive. He looked at the wound on her temple. He shifted the jacket sleeve and saw the bruising on her forearm. He looked at it for a moment. He'd seen enough injuries to understand the physics of them. He knew how force distributed through a body. He knew the difference between an impact bruise and a grip bruise, the difference between the way a body protects itself in a fall and the way skin responds to being grabbed. The bruising on Lila's arm was not from a fall. It was 4 distinct pressure points. Someone had grabbed her, hard enough and fast enough to leave the mark. Dad! Her voice came from far away, small and dry. She had opened her eyes, barely, like the effort cost her. She was looking up at the ceiling of the bay, blinking slowly. I'm right here. He took her hand. His voice came out steady. He had no idea how. Stay still. You're at the hospital. You're safe. I'm sorry, she murmured. Don't be sorry. You didn't do a single thing wrong. He squeezed her hand once, carefully. Not one thing. He kept his face calm. He kept his movements smooth. He was a professional. He had a job to do. He did it. But underneath that, in the part of him that wasn't a trauma nurse at all, that was just a father who had bought a jacket with a star on it, something was cracking open. Quietly, down the middle. The kind of crack that doesn't make noise because it goes all the way through. He stepped back and let Denise take over the intake. He walked to the far end of the hallway. He stood with his back against the wall and stared at the ceiling tile above him. He breathed carefully, the way you breathe when you're trying to keep the body doing its basic jobs while the mind works something very difficult. He thought about the bruise on her arm. He thought about the shape of it. He thought about the neighbor who had called the paramedics and what that meant about where Nadia had been. Then he stopped thinking about it, because thinking about it right now would not help anyone. He needed to be useful. Useful first. Everything else after. He pushed off the wall and went back to work. They kept Lila for observation through the night. No broken bones. No concussion beyond mild. Physically, the attending said she would be fine. Darren sat beside her bed in Bay 6 for 2 hours past the end of his shift. Nobody told him to leave. Nobody was going to. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the ventilation system and the occasional soft squeak of rubber saws passing in the corridor outside. A monitor somewhere 2 bays overgave a single beep every few minutes, and the sound marked the time like a slow clock. The lights in the bay were dimmed to half. He watched Lila sleep. He studied her breathing, the way it had evened out from the shallow, panicked rhythm of when she'd first come in. He watched her hands, which rested open at her sides, palms up, the way children sleep when they feel safe enough to stop protecting themselves. He was glad she could feel safe here, in this clinical room with its antiseptic smell and its 4 lines and its institutional blankets. He was glad this place felt like safety to her tonight. He thought about her arm. He thought about the absence of any adult at the scene. He thought about the neighbor who had heard crying through the fence, who had looked over the gate and found an 8-year-old alone in the dark at the base of her own back steps. He thought, when did this house become a place where that could happen? The guilt of that question arrived whole and heavy, and he let it stay. He didn't argue with it or redirect it. There were things he had not seen coming, not because he was stupid, but because he had been looking at the wrong things. He'd been watching the mortgage. He'd been watching Lila's school reports. He'd been watching the level in the water heater. He had been looking at the structure of things while something eroded inside it. He accepted this now. He would decide later what to do with it. Around 2 in the morning, Lila stirred. She turned her head on the pillow and blinked. For a moment, her eyes were unfocused, moving through the confusion of waking somewhere strange. Then she found his face, and her expression settled like a compass finding north. Hey, Darren said very quietly. Hey, Dad, does anything hurt right now? She took the question seriously in the way she took most things seriously, running an honest check. My arm still hurts, and my head a little, like behind my eye. They gave you something for both of those. It'll work better as you sleep. She nodded slowly. She looked down at the blanket, and he could see her working up to something. He knew that look. She'd had it since she was very small. The face of someone who was carrying something they weren't sure they were allowed to put down. "Lila," he said gently. "What happened?" She picked at the edge of the blanket. Her jaw tightened. There were several seconds of silence that had weight to them. "Mom grabbed my arm," she said. The words came out soft and careful, like she was placing them down one at a time. "She didn't mean to make me fall, but she grabbed it really hard. I lost my balance on the step, and then I was at the bottom." He didn't move. He kept his hands still and his face open. What was she upset about? A longer pause. "I came downstairs because I heard talking," Lila said. "It was late. I wasn't supposed to be awake. I didn't know there was anyone there. And then I walked into the kitchen and there was a man." She paused. "Mom saw me and she got really scared. She looked scared in the way she looks when something's really wrong. She came across the room fast and grabbed my arm, and she was telling me to go back upstairs, and I tried to, but she stopped. She swallowed once." "You don't have to finish it," he said. "His name was Trent," Lila said. She said his name. He was standing near the counter. She looked up at Darren then, and what was in her eyes wasn't fear of him. It was fear of the weight of what she was carrying. "Is she in trouble?" Darren thought carefully about the answer. "She'll need to deal with some things, yes," he said. "But that's not your problem. None of this is your problem. Are you mad at her?" He looked at his daughter. He thought about what honesty looked like in a situation like this. Not the brutal kind that unburdened the person saying it at the cost of the person hearing it, but the real kind that honored the person enough to tell them the truth. "I'm not mad right now," he said. "I'm something else. But I'm not going to take it out on you, and I'm not going to fall apart." "Okay." She studied his face. She was good at reading him. Had always been, even when she was very small. She seemed to find what she needed in his expression because she nodded once and lay back against the pillow. "Go back to sleep," he told her. "I'll be right here." She closed her eyes. He watched the tension slowly leave her face as she went under again. He sat in the dark with his elbows on his knees. He was very still. The monitor beeped its slow, steady beat. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed and opened again. He thought about the name Trent. He didn't know that name. And the fact that he didn't know it, that someone had been in his house, in his kitchen, around his child, long enough that he had a name and a presence and an association with Nadia that Darren had never detected, told him more about the scope of it than any single detail could have. He stayed until 5:30 in the morning, when the early shift began coming through and the corridor outside started filling with noise. Then he stood up, stretched out his back, and stood for a moment looking at Lila. She was breathing. She was safe. He went to talk to the attending about discharge. He drove home in the gray early morning. The streets of Toledo still mostly empty. The sky the color of old concrete. He had not slept. He did not feel tired. He felt something closer to the particular clarity that comes when everything has been stripped down to what is real and what you need to do about it. The house looked the same from the outside. That bothered him somehow. Red brick, tidy yard, the plastic bin near the garage he'd been meaning to replace for 2 years. There was no visible sign that the inside of it had become a place where his daughter lay at the base of the steps alone in the dark while the woman responsible for her was somewhere deciding how much of the truth would cost her. He used his key. He came in through the front door, not the side. He didn't try to be quiet. Nadia was in the kitchen. She was wearing her dark robe, sitting at the table with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug. She looked up when she heard him come in, and in the half-second before she put her expression together, he saw fear move across her face. Not the fear of a wife worried about her husband's late shift. A different fear. The fear of a person who knows that the conversation coming toward them is one they cannot control. "Darren." She said his name like it was two things at once, a greeting and a warning. He came in and stood across the table from her. He did not sit. "You need to explain to me what happened last night," he said. "I already called the hospital early this morning. They said she's stable." She kept her hands on the mug. Her knuckles were pale. "It was an accident. She came downstairs. She slipped. She wasn't supposed to be up at that hour. Nadia." She stopped. "Lila told me everything." He said it the same way he said things in the bay when someone was giving him a version of the truth that didn't line up with the evidence in front of him. Plain. Flat. without accusation in the voice, because the voice didn't need to carry accusation. The facts were already doing that work. The silence that followed changed the temperature of the room. He watched her work through it. He could see the calculation happening. She was a smart woman, she always had been, and her mind was moving through options. Deny more? Redirect? Appeal to their history, to the years, to the investment? He recognized the process. He had seen it before in other contexts. It was the process of someone deciding how much of the truth they could afford to give without losing everything. She chose wrong. The guilt on her face shifted. It hardened into something cornered. She wasn't supposed to see that, she said sharply. She came down when she should have been asleep, and she scared me. I reacted. I reached for her arm, and I didn't mean for... You grabbed your daughter hard enough to leave for distinct bruise marks on her forearm, Darren said. I've seen grip bruises on patients for 11 years. I know what they look like. Her jaw tightened. She looked at the table. Who is Trent? He asked. The name hit her. He could see it in the slight flinch of her shoulders, the way her hands tightened on the mug. He's someone I know from the building where I work, she said. Her voice was lower now. It wasn't. It was nothing, Darren. How long has it been going on? She didn't answer. The silence was the answer. It was the kind of silence that comes when a number is too large or a duration too long to say, without the weight of it becoming undeniable. You brought someone into this house, he said. Into the kitchen of the house I go to work at night to pay for. While Lila was asleep upstairs. And when she came downstairs and you panicked, she fell. And then you left. You left her there, and you didn't call anyone. She stopped. You were scared. You finished it for her. I understand that. You were scared and you made a choice. And your choice was to protect yourself, not her. Nadia looked up at him then, and the tears came. He watched them come. And so did the anger, which he had expected because it had always lived just below the surface with her, the anger that arrived when the world did not cooperate with what she needed it to be. You're never home. The words came out sharp and real. You work nights and you come home exhausted and you sit on that couch and you're present in body and nowhere else. You think I've been happy living like that? You think that's a marriage? I work nights so Lila could stay in her school, he said. I worked nights so we could afford this neighborhood and the car and the life you said you wanted. I wanted a husband who looked at me. The kitchen went quiet. He stood very still. He felt the truth in those words. Not the truth of what she'd done, but the truth underneath it, the real disappointment that had lived in this house for longer than he wanted to count. He heard it. He did not deny it, but he held it next to everything else. And when he did, it did not change what he had seen on his daughter's arm. It did not change the mark in the hospital record. It did not change the neighbor who had found a child alone in the dark. Lila gave me a name, he said quietly. She described what she saw and where he was standing and what you said. My daughter told me in a hospital bed at 2 in the morning what was happening in her own kitchen. There is nothing you can say that changes what she described. He looked at Nadia directly. And there is nothing you can say that changes what I have already decided to do. She stared at him. What does that mean? It means I'm picking up Lila from the hospital this morning. It means you need to think about where you're going. And it means I've already made the calls that needed to be made. He walked to the bathroom. He started the shower. He stood under the water with both hands flat against the tile and let it run as hot as it would go until the steam filled everything. He didn't let himself think about the marriage or what it had been or the feeling of standing in a kitchen talking to someone who used to know him. He thought about Lila. He thought about the star on the collar of a navy jacket. He thought about the words she'd said. I'm sorry. He pressed his forehead against the tile and breathed until the shaking in his hands stopped. Then he turned off the water, got dressed, and went to get his daughter. He didn't go looking for Trent Vargo that same day. He was not an impulsive man. He had learned a long time ago that actions taken in the first hours of something terrible were often the ones you paid for later, and he had too much riding on the next few months to let anger run ahead of judgment. He picked Lila up from the hospital that morning. She was quiet in the car, not sad, exactly, but careful, like she was reading the weather and wasn't sure yet what kind of day it was going to be. He put on the radio, a station she liked, and let the music take up the space where questions might have gone. He stopped at a drive-thru and got her a breakfast sandwich and orange juice, and she ate it in the passenger seat with the focused attention of someone who was hungrier than they realized. That was a good sign. Hunger meant something in her was reaching back toward the ordinary. He got her home. He got her settled on the couch with her blanket and a show she'd been watching before everything happened. He texted his supervisor about taking leave. He had days saved up, more than most, because he had never been the type to use them. And within 20 minutes, it was arranged. He had 2 weeks. Nadia was not home. He noticed her absence the way you notice a tooth that's been pulled. The space was there. The space was correct. He spent that afternoon in quiet motion. He did laundry. He made soup. He sat on the couch beside Lila through 2 episodes of her show, and she leaned against his arm without asking, which told him everything about how she was doing and what she needed. He stayed very still so she wouldn't shift away. He researched Trent Vargo after she went to bed. It took about 20 minutes to find the right one. There were not that many in Toledo, and the correct one became obvious quickly from the details that aligned. Mid-30s, general contractor, worked for a commercial outfit on the south side. His social media had photos of job sites and weekends with a group of men who all looked like they'd been built for outdoor work. He had the easy confidence in those photos of a man who believed life owed him good things and had so far received enough of them to continue believing it. Darren closed the laptop. He sat in the kitchen quiet for a while. He made a note of the company name and the area of the city. Then he went to bed. He slept 4 hours, which was more than he'd expected. 2 mornings later, he asked his neighbor Rosa to sit with Lila for a couple of hours. Rosa was 63 and had known their family since they moved onto the street. She didn't ask why. She said she'd be there by 8, and she was. Darren drove to the south side. The job site was a half-finished commercial building near the edge of the industrial district. Concrete bones, exposed rebar on the upper floors, plastic sheeting snapping in the cold wind where the windows would eventually be. Work trucks lined the access road. A generator rumbled somewhere around the far corner of the structure, and the sound of cutting metal rode the air in long, sharp bursts. He found Trent in 3 minutes. He was leaning against a white pickup, coffee in hand, talking on his phone with the relaxed body language of a man who had woken up that morning with no weight on him. He was broad-shouldered and tan in the weathered way of someone who worked outside in all seasons. He finished his call and noticed Darren walking toward him, and his face went through several expressions in quick succession. Neutral, uncertain, then something that flickered with recognition and tried to become casual. It didn't make it. "Darren Cole," Darren said. He stopped 2 feet away. Nadia's husband. Trent straightened off the truck. "Hey man, look, I know this is..." Darren grabbed the front of his vest with both hands and drove him back into the side of the truck. The metal rang with it. Trent's coffee hit the gravel, and the plastic lid spun away. A man 50 yards across the lot looked up. Darren held him there. He was not yelling. He was not out of control. He was very close and very still, and that stillness was worse than yelling would have been. "You were in my house," Darren said. "Around my daughter. I didn't know. She told me the situation was you were in my house." He said it again, slower. "My 8-year-old daughter came downstairs and saw you standing in her kitchen at night. And because she saw you, her mother grabbed her arm trying to get her back upstairs, and she fell down the back steps. She spent the night in the hospital." He held his gaze. "My daughter." Trent had gone white. There was no performance left in his face. "I didn't know that happened. I didn't hear anything about, you were there and then you weren't there. That's the version you chose." Darren pulled him forward and pushed it back again hard. "You do not contact Nadia. You do not come near anything connected to my family. My daughter's name does not come out of your mouth. If I have to come back here for any reason, I will not start with grabbing your vest." He released him. He stepped back. He straightened his own jacket with 2 careful movements. Trent stood against the truck, breathing. Then he said something Darren hadn't expected. He said it quietly, the way people say things when they're realizing something in real time. "She told me not to worry about it. She said you'd never find out. She said she had the whole thing handled." Darren looked at him. He felt the information settle into the picture he was assembling, one piece at a time. Not shock, just clarity. The picture was becoming very complete. "That's no longer my problem," Darren said. "But it might be yours." He walked back to his truck. He drove away at a normal speed. His hands were steady on the wheel. He gave it 2 more days before he moved. This was not hesitation. This was method. He needed every step he took from here to be clean, documented, impossible to mischaracterize by anyone who might later be asked what kind of man Darren Cole was. He called an attorney on the morning after the confrontation. A man named Gerald Park, recommended by a co-worker whose divorce Darren had watched from a distance a few years back. Park had a small office downtown and answered his own phone, which Darren took as a good sign. They met that afternoon. Darren laid out the facts the way he did everything, clearly, in sequence, without drama. The hospital admission, the nature of the bruising, the attending's documentation, the neighbor's account, what Lila had said, what Nadia had said, what Darren had observed at the job site. Park asked questions in a neutral voice, typing steadily. At the end, he leaned back his chair and said, "You have a strong position on custody. I want to file quickly." Darren said, "Do it." On Wednesday evening, Nadia came back. He heard the side door. He was in the kitchen when she appeared in the doorway with a bag at her feet, wearing the same coat she'd had on 2 days ago, looking like someone who had been trying to figure out what to say and had run out of time to figure it out. He stayed at the counter. "We need to talk," she said. "We do," he agreed. She sat at the table. He remained standing. He had learned, years ago, that conversations go differently depending on who decides when they're over. "I know how bad this looks," she started. "But if you'll just hear me out, there's context you don't have. I have Lila's account," he said. "I have the hospital record. I have a neighbor's statement. Those are the facts I'm working from. You're not even going to let me. You can say what you need to say. I'm listening." He kept his voice even. "I just want you to know that what you say won't change the decision I've already made. I'm not telling you that to be cruel. I'm telling you because you deserve the honest version." She looked at the table. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I made a mistake." "You made a series of choices," he said. The distinction mattered to him, and he put it carefully. A mistake is something that happens before you understand what you're doing. You understood what you were doing every step of the way. You chose to bring someone into this house. You chose to keep it secret. When the secret was at risk, you chose to reach for your daughter instead of letting her walk away. And then you chose to leave. He looked at her steadily. "That's not one mistake. That's a pattern of choices." She looked up. Her eyes were wet. "So what happens now? You're throwing me out." He went to the bedroom. He pulled her large suitcase down from the top shelf of the closet and set it on the bed. He opened it. He went to her side of the dresser and began placing clothes inside, folded the way he folded everything. Methodical, unhurried, with the same care he gave any practical task. He took her toiletries from the bathroom. He packed what she would need for the immediate days ahead. She appeared in the bedroom doorway. "Darren, Darren, stop. You can't just, this is my home. Lila lives here," he said. "This is her home. You can arrange with Park's office to collect the rest of your things once you have an address." "Where am I supposed to go?" He zipped the suitcase, set it upright, rolled it to the front door. He went back for the second bag and did the same. "You have people you can call," he said. "The same people you called the last 2 nights." She stood in the hallway. The crying was there, but something behind it had gone hard. The particular hardness of someone who is calculating loss in real time. "I gave you years, Darren. I gave you everything I had for 11 years. He stopped and looked at her directly. "You gave Lila a mother," he said. "And then one night, you left her at the bottom of the back steps alone in the dark. That's the thing I cannot build around. Not the affair. Not the lying. That's the thing." He opened the front door. Cold air came in. She stood in the doorway for a moment. She looked at his face one more time, and whatever she was searching for, his face did not provide it. She picked up the bag. She walked out. He closed the door. The house was quiet. He stood in the hallway and breathed. Down the hall, the television played in Lila's room. Some cheerful theme song, muffled through the door. He knocked. "Yeah," she called. "You need anything before I start the dishwasher?" A pause. "Can I have some water?" "Coming right now," he said. He went to the kitchen, got a glass, filled it, walked down the hall, and knocked again, came in, handed it to her. She was cross-legged on her bed, with her book open beside her and the show playing in the background. She took the glass with both hands, the way she'd taken glasses since she was very small. "Thanks, Dad. Get some sleep soon," he said. "I know." He pulled the door halfway closed. He stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he went and did the dishes. Gerald Park moved quickly and without sentiment, which was exactly what Darren needed from him. The filing went in within the week. Within 2 weeks, Nadia had retained a lawyer, a woman named Hartley who opened with a letter that made clear she intended to contest everything. She got less than she planned for. The first hearing had the flat, fluorescent quality of all legal proceedings. Uncomfortable chairs, clipped language, everyone performing a version of themselves that had been carefully prepared for this room. Darren sat beside Park with his hands folded on the table and answered questions directly and did not offer anything beyond what was asked. Nadia's attorney argued that the incident was isolated, that Nadia's 8 years as primary caregiver established standing, and that Darren's night schedule made him a less stable primary parent. Park responded without raising his voice. The injury documentation from the hospital, the pediatric notes confirming that Lila's account was consistent and credible, the neighbor's written statement describing weeks of irregular activity at the home, and the night she found Lila alone on the steps. And Darren, Park noted, had already arranged a schedule modification with his employer, day shifts during the school week, maintaining income through weekend hours, eliminating the scheduling concern entirely. When Nadia's attorney raised the confrontation with Trent Vargo, Park was prepared. The encounter had involved physical contact, yes. Trent Vargo had chosen not to file a report. No charges had been brought. In the context of what a father had discovered about his child's safety, the single incident was understandable and had not been repeated. The judge listened. She was a small woman with reading glasses that hung on a chain and a patience that seemed to come from having spent decades hearing people in pain explain why the other person was wrong. She asked clarifying questions in a neutral tone. She reviewed the documents Park submitted without visible reaction. The ruling came 2 weeks later. Full physical custody to Darren Cole. Supervised visitation for Nadia, conditional on a 6-month evaluation. Child support to be determined at a follow-up proceeding. Hartley was already talking strategy for an appeal before they made it out of the building. Nadia said something to Hartley in a low, urgent voice, and Darren caught pieces of it without trying to. Words like unfair and temporary, and you said. He kept walking. He did not turn around. Outside, the air was cold and direct, and it felt like honesty. He stopped on the courthouse steps and looked up at the pale November sky for a moment. He thought about how different this day looked from the day he had imagined when he married her. The day he'd stood at the front of that small event hall in the good suit his mother had helped him pick, watching her come down the aisle and thinking, with the particular certainty of a 28-year-old who believes the future is something he can maintain through effort alone, that this was the beginning of a life built to last. He had tried. He knew that, whatever else was true. He had shown up in the ways he knew how to show up. And she had needed something he hadn't known how to give, and instead of telling him that, she had looked for it elsewhere and put their daughter at risk in the process. There was grief in the full picture and complexity, and he was not going to pretend otherwise. But Lila had a home. Lila was safe. That was the thing he had fought for and the thing he had won, and standing in the cold outside a courthouse was exactly the right place to let that settle into him. Hartley was already talking strategy for an appeal before they made it out of the building. Darren shook Park's hand and collected his copy of the order and walked out into a cold afternoon. He sat in his truck in the parking structure for a few minutes. He looked at the concrete wall in front of him. He felt the weight of the last several weeks sitting on his chest. Not regret, not grief exactly, but something like the particular exhaustion of having held yourself together through something long and difficult and arriving finally at a stable place. He had done everything he could do in the right order. He had protected Lila first. He had stayed controlled when it would have been easy not to be. He had let the process work instead of trying to force it. It had worked. He started the truck. He drove to Rose's house to pick up his daughter. The first 3 months were harder in certain ways than Darren had expected, and easier in others. The hard part was the silence, not loneliness. Lila filled the house the way children fill any space, with noise and motion and the constant generating of small, urgent needs. But there was a particular quiet in certain corners of the house. In the evenings after she was asleep, that was new. He'd been alone before. He'd grown up with long stretches of solitude and had never minded it. But there was a difference between alone and the specific shape of a household that had once held more than it held now. He learned to live with it. You put things in their places and you keep moving. He enrolled Lila in therapy the week after the hospital. Her therapist was a woman named Dr. Okafor who worked out of a small office on the west side and had a calm, methodical manner that Lila took to almost immediately. She wasn't warm in the obvious or performative way. She was simply steady, unhurried. Whatever Lila brought in on a given Thursday, Dr. Okafor received it without alarm. Darren drove her there every week and sat in the waiting room with whatever was in the magazine rack, which was usually something he had no interest in. He read it anyway, because sitting still required an object. The school was informed of what was necessary and no more. Lila's teacher turned out to be the right kind of person for the situation, careful, observant, not prone to over-intervention. She sent Darren a brief email each Friday. He read every one. He adjusted his work schedule, trading night shifts for days. The pay was slightly lower. He picked up weekend overtime to cover the difference. He arranged things the way he had always arranged things, by solving the problem in front of him without waiting for a better set of options to appear. What surprised him was how steadily Lila began to come back to herself. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the sudden reversal that happens in movies. It was small things accumulating. The morning she argued with him about what shoes to wear to school, which meant something in her had returned to caring about ordinary disputes. The afternoon she came home and told him at length and with great seriousness about a conflict between two of her friends, which meant she was involved in her own social world again. The Friday evening, she laughed at something on TV, a real laugh, not the cautious, polite kind, and didn't look at him afterward to check whether it was okay. He watched these things the way he watched vitals on a patient who was improving, quietly, without making them into occasions. He thought, sometimes, about the version of himself from 2 years ago, the man who came home from night shifts and sat on the couch, and was present in body only half asleep, going through the motions of the evening without fully inhabiting it. He had not known, then, how much of Lila's childhood he was receiving without registering. How many ordinary evenings he treated as background noise when they were, in fact, the whole thing. He could not get those back. That was something he sat with honestly, not to punish himself, but to understand how it had happened, so he could choose differently now. He chose differently now. Every day, he chose differently. He did have to answer hard questions sometimes. One evening, about 2 months in, she looked up from her dinner and asked him if her mom was going to come back. He put down his fork. He thought about it. She might visit eventually, he said. There's a process for that. But she won't live here. Because of what she did. Because of the choices she made, he said. When someone makes choices that hurt their family the way she did, things change permanently. Lila was quiet for a moment. Then, did she love him more than us? He chose his words the way he chose everything. Carefully. She chose something that wasn't us, he said. And then she made choices that made things worse. I don't think it was about love. I think it was about her not doing the hard work that keeping a family safe requires. Lila absorbed this with the solemn attention of a child who knows she's being treated with respect. Then she nodded slowly and went back to her dinner. Darren ate. He thought about what she'd asked, the simplicity and the depth of it. Did she love him more than us? It was the right question. It was probably the only question underneath everything. He didn't have a clean answer. He wasn't sure anyone did. But he had this dinner and this table and this daughter who was sitting across from him eating and thinking and still asking questions. That was the thing he had. He held on to it. He didn't track Nadia. That was not who he was, and it would not have served any purpose he could justify. He had removed her from the operational structure of his life as completely as the legal situation allowed, and he had no interest in monitoring what happened next. But information arrived anyway, the way it does in a city the size of Toledo, where the degree of separation between any two lives is never very large. Denise mentioned, in passing, one afternoon in the spring, that someone she knew had seen Nadia at a bar on the east side and that she hadn't looked well. Darren received this, said nothing specific in response, and changed the subject. He wasn't indifferent to it. He was human, but he was clear about the boundary between Nadia's life and his. Rosa told him, with her characteristic directness, that she had heard Nadia was living with Trent Vargo in a rental across town. Darren nodded. He thanked her. He moved on. 2 months after that, word came through an indirect channel, someone connected to the building where Nadia had worked, that she was no longer employed there. The stated reason was budget, but the phrasing around it suggested the real reasons were less tidy. And then Park called, in connection with the remaining financial matter from a settlement, and mentioned that Trent Vargo had ended the arrangement. No drama, as far as Park could tell. Just the quiet cessation of something that had served its purpose for the person who'd had all the leverage in it. Nadia had moved out of the rental. Her current address was not on file. Darren sat with that information for a day. He looked at it. He tried to name what he felt. It was not satisfaction. He had expected satisfaction might be in there somewhere. The particular human pleasure of watching someone who hurt you absorb consequences. It wasn't. What he found instead was something quieter and sadder. A recognition of how predictable the arc had been from the beginning. He had known Trent Vargo for 4 minutes against a truck on a job site. He'd seen enough of him to understand the type. The kind of man who was built for beginnings. Who was at his best when something was new and risky and charged with the energy of a secret. Who had no architecture for the part that came after. The ordinary mornings, the budgeting, the sitting with someone through a hard stretch. The part where showing up had to stop being exciting and start being a choice you made every single day. Nadia had given up a man who made that choice routinely, without fanfare, for a man who had never been required to make it at all. And now the man who didn't make it had moved on to whatever came next for him, and she was alone with the aftermath. He didn't feel vindicated by this. He felt the particular sorrow of watching someone you once knew clearly walk a road they built themselves toward an outcome they could have seen coming if they'd been willing to look. It was the same feeling he sometimes had at work, the feeling of watching a preventable injury happen in slow motion, unable to stop it, only able to wait and treat what arrived. He was not waiting for her. He was not treating anything, but he understood the shape of it, and it made him tired rather than glad. He had his house. He had his daughter. He had his days. He had the particular quiet of Tuesday evenings after Lila went to bed, when the house was completely his and he could sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and not be needed by anyone for a full hour. He had learned to value that hour. It was not emptiness. It was rest. That was enough. It was a Saturday in early autumn, about 4 months after the divorce was finalized. Darren was raking leaves in the backyard. The big oak in the far corner dropped aggressively every fall, and this year was no different. The yard was thick with them, a deep layered carpet of brown and yellow and damp. Lila had helped for about 20 minutes before she determined that the task was unpleasant and migrated inside to watch a show, which meant Darren was now alone with a rake and approximately 14 bags worth of leaves and a quiet appreciation for the injustice of it. He was midway through the second pile when he heard the doorbell from the front. He leaned the rake against the fence and went around the side of the house. He opened the front door. Nadia was standing on the porch. He almost didn't recognize her for a moment, which caught him off guard in a way he hadn't expected. He knew her face, had known it for over a decade, but something in it had shifted so significantly that his brain needed an extra second to confirm the match. She was thinner, the kind of thin that wasn't intentional. Her coat was one he didn't recognize and was too light for October. There were circles under her eyes that spoke of weeks of poor sleep and worse eating. The particular energy that had always moved around her, a kind of charged restlessness, something between ambition and dissatisfaction, was gone. She looked at him with no defiance in her face at all. Whatever had been holding that posture in place had been removed. Darren stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind him. He did it without thinking about it. He didn't want her voice in the same air as Lila. "Nadia, I know I shouldn't be here," she said immediately. "The supervised visitation arrangement goes through Park's office. You haven't used it. I know. This isn't about that." She looked at her hands, then back at him. "I'm in a bad place right now, Darren. I don't have anything. I thought maybe you could help me. Just something to get back on my feet. I have nowhere else to go. You have a sister in Columbus." She shook her head. "We're not speaking anymore. I burned that." She pressed her lips together. I burn a lot of things. He looked at her. He was not unmoved. He was not made of something that didn't register another person's pain. But he was also clear about what this conversation was, and what he was and was not responsible for. Why do you think I should help you? He asked. Not as a challenge, as a genuine question. Her eyes filled slowly. Because I'm asking. Because we spent 11 years together. Because you're the most decent person I know, and I know that's a strange thing to say to you right now, but it's true. Decent people don't always protect you from the consequences of your own decisions, he said. I know what I did, Darren. Her voice went soft. I know I hurt Lila. I know I hurt you. I know exactly how bad it was. Then you understand why I'm not going to be the one you fall back on. She reached out and touched his arm. He stepped back, not aggressively, just clearly. He moved out of reach. I'm still her mother, she said. You are, he agreed. And if you want to be in her life within what the court allows, you know how to do that. But being her mother doesn't give you a claim on me. It doesn't make me responsible for stabilizing a life you built and then let fall apart. He kept his voice even. There was no cruelty in it. He was simply being accurate. She looked at him for a long moment. He could see her working through it, looking for the angle that would move him, the word that would open the door. He watched it happen and felt something close to grief, because he recognized her face when it was searching, when it was working an audience, and this was that face. Even now, even here, take care of yourself, he said. He said it and meant it in the plain sense. Not as a dismissal, as the only honest thing he had left to give her. He opened the door and went inside. He locked it. He stood in the entry hall. Through the narrow side window, he watched her stand on the porch for a few seconds. Then she turned and walked down the steps and up the street without looking back. Dad, Lila called from the living room. Can we eat dinner kind of early? I'm actually hungry. He breathed in. Yeah, he said. Give me 10 minutes. He went to the kitchen. The call came on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks later. Park's number on the phone, which was unusual. Park emailed. If he was calling, there was something specific. Darren picked up on the second ring. I wanted you to hear it from me before it was anywhere public, Park said. Nadia was arrested yesterday. Wire fraud, participating in a financial scheme. There are several people involved. She appears to be a secondary participant, someone who was brought in by a person she trusted. The DA knows she's not the architect of it, but the charges are serious regardless. How serious? Darren asked. 18 months to 3 years, depending on how the plea negotiation goes. She has a public defender. He thanked Park. He ended the call. He set the phone on the kitchen counter and stood there. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. The normal sounds of a normal morning continued as if nothing had shifted. He wasn't surprised. He wished he were. It would have been easier, in some way, to be surprised, to feel that something unexpected and unjust had happened to someone who hadn't been heading toward it. But he had seen her on his porch 6 weeks ago. He had seen her face, the desperation in it, the way she was reaching for anything. He knew what desperate people did when they had no structure around them, and someone with a scheme appeared offering a shortcut. He understood exactly how it had happened, even without knowing the specific facts of it. He called the school. He spoke to someone in the front office and let her know that some information might circulate over the coming days and that he wanted the staff to be aware in case Lila showed any signs of distress. The woman on the phone was professional and calm. She said they would keep a careful eye out. He didn't tell Lila that weekend. He waited until Monday morning, over breakfast, when things were calm and she was rested and there was time before school, but not so much time that the conversation would stretch further than it needed to. I need to tell you something about your mom, he said. She looked up from her cereal. She made some choices that got her into serious trouble with the law. She's going to have to face some consequences for those choices. She'll be in a correctional facility for a period of time. Lila sat with this. She turned her spoon in the bowl. She looked at him. Is it because of what she did to us? No, he said. This is separate. These are things she did after. New decisions. Her own. He paused. None of it is your fault, and none of it is something you caused. She nodded slowly. Will she be okay? He thought about that. She'll be housed and fed and safe, he said. Whether she'll be okay depends on what she does while she's there. Lila looked at the table. Then she said, I hope she's okay. Even though, she stopped. Even though what? She shook her head. I don't know. I just hope she's okay. He looked at his daughter, 8, almost 9 years old, sitting at a breakfast table before school, managing something no child should have to manage, and still finding room in herself to hope that the person who had hurt her was okay. He didn't know what to do with that except honor it. That's a good thing to feel, he said. They finished breakfast. He drove her to school. She waved from the front steps and went inside. He sat in the car for a minute before pulling away. The months after that moved the way good months do. Not smoothly, not without friction, but with something reliable underneath them that made the friction navigable. Darren did not visit Nadia. He did not receive personal correspondence from her, and if she sent anything through legal channels, Park handled it without requiring Darren's direct involvement. There was no remaining obligation strong enough to require ongoing engagement, and he felt no guilt about the absence of one. He thought about her sometimes, not often, in the involuntary way that people from your past return to you briefly when something specific brings them. A song that used to play in the kitchen, a turn in the road that used to lead to a place they went together, a particular shade of late afternoon light that belonged to a different season of his life. These were not wounds anymore. They were just pieces of a past that had happened and was over. He did not permit himself to revise that past into something it hadn't been. The marriage had been real. The trouble in it had been real too, and had existed before the betrayal made it undeniable. He held all of it, the genuine years and the genuine failures, without simplifying either. He had no interest in turning Nadia into a villain for the story's convenience, and no interest in pretending the loss wasn't a loss. It had been both. That was the honest version. Lila turned 9 in the spring. She had a birthday party with 4 friends from school, and the house was full of noise and half-eaten cake and the particular chaos of 4 girls with strong opinions about which game to play next. Darren stood in the kitchen doorway watching it and felt something in his chest that wasn't complicated at all. Just warmth, uncomplicated and solid. The specific warmth of a life that is, on balance, good. She had started sleeping with her door open again. Dr. Okafor, when Darren mentioned it at a parent check-in, said it was a meaningful sign, a quiet, physical way of telling the world that she no longer needed to barricade herself from it. Darren heard this and nodded. He knew what it meant. He'd been watching it with the same careful attention he gave anything important. He was not the same man he had been a year ago. He had not been broken by what happened. He had been, if anything, clarified. There was a version of this story in which a man loses a marriage and loses himself inside the loss. He had seen it happen to others. The anger that doesn't go anywhere useful, the bitterness that turns into a slow erosion, the way grief for something that failed can convince a person that failure is what they deserve. He had stood at the edge of all of that and chosen differently, not because he was better than it, but because he had a daughter watching him, and you cannot give a child a lesson that falling apart is the appropriate response to being wronged. You give them something to stand on instead. He knew himself more completely now. He knew what he would hold and what he would let go. He knew the difference between duty and punishment, between protecting the people you love and carrying a weight that wasn't yours to carry. He had learned to be alone without treating it as a condition that needed curing. He had evenings now that were his own, and he had found things to put in them, a book, the maintenance he'd always meant to do on the house, long walks in the cold that cleared his head in the particular way that nothing else did. He was not happy in the uncomplicated way of someone who has never had something hard happen to them. He was something better than that, steady, grounded, present. He had chosen not to carry what didn't belong to him anymore. He was beginning to understand that this was its own kind of peace. One evening in late October, exactly a year from the night Darren had looked up in that hospital bay and recognized his daughter's jacket, they sat together on the front porch. It was the kind of autumn evening that seemed designed for stillness. Cool without being sharp, the last warmth of the season sitting in the boards of the porch, the street quiet in the particular way of a weekday evening after the day's motion has settled. Leaves moved along the sidewalk in small, unhurried groups. Somewhere down the street, someone had a fire going, and the smell of wood smoke came in on the air in slow, clean waves. Lila was in her green jacket, the new one, her choice this year, with a library book open on her lap that she wasn't reading. Her legs swung off the edge of the porch step. Darren had his coffee. He was watching a crow pick methodically at something near the base of the oak at the property edge, moving around it with the focused patience of an expert at its particular work. The silence between them was easy. It had taken time to get here, to this specific quality of quiet that didn't require filling. He appreciated it now in a way he wouldn't have known to appreciate a year ago. Dad, Lila said. Yeah. She looked at the street, at the leaves moving. You didn't forgive her, right? Mom. He didn't answer immediately. He let the question sit. The crow found what it was looking for, picked it up, and flew off with the particular decisive efficiency of something that knows exactly what it came for. No, he said. She looked at him. Why not? He turned toward her. She had that look she got when a question had been living with her for a while. Not confrontational, not testing him. Just genuine. The face of someone who is trying to understand how things work, because understanding is the only tool she trusts. He thought about how to say it right. Not to make himself look good. Not to give her something simple and memorable. To tell her the actual truth in a form she could hold. Forgiveness isn't something you give because time has passed or because someone asked for it, he said. It's something you give when someone has actually understood what they did. When they've sat with it and changed because of it. Your mom hasn't done that work. Maybe she will someday. I don't know. But forgiving someone who hasn't done that work doesn't help them, and it doesn't help you. It just lets everyone pretend that consequences don't matter. Lila turned this over. Her legs stopped swinging. But you don't hate her. It was not a question. He looked at her. No, I don't. What do you feel? He thought about it. I feel like something that used to be one thing is now separate things. And that's okay. That's just what it is. She considered this with the particular seriousness she brought to things that genuinely mattered to her. Then she looked at the street again. Do you think she's different now? After everything? I think consequences change people sometimes, he said. Whether they change them in the right direction depends on the person. I genuinely don't know which way that goes for her. A pause. I hope it goes the right way, Lila said quietly. He looked at her, at this person, small and serious and somehow already more complete than most people he knew, who had been hurt and was still here, still asking questions, still hoping for things. He felt the particular love that doesn't have a name more specific than love, the kind that isn't sentimental, isn't soft, but is absolute in the way that gravity is absolute. Me too, he said. They sat with that for a minute. The wood smoke drifted past. The lamp at the end of the walk came on, orange in the dusk. Can we make hot chocolate? Lila asked. It's getting cold. Go start the milk, he said. Low heat. She jumped up, pulled the door open with the easy carelessness of someone who knows she's safe to make noise, and disappeared inside. Darren stayed on the porch for one more moment. He looked at the quiet street. The oak tree, with its remaining leaves, catching the last of the light. The lamp. The sky going from orange to gray at its edges in the way October skies do, like a door closing gently. He had not forgiven Nadia. He had not needed to. The consequences had done what consequences do. They had arrived in their own time with their own weight. He had not needed to force them or celebrate them or even watch them particularly. He had just needed to be where he was, doing what he did day after day. He had given Lila consistency. He had given her safety and presence, and the particular gift of a parent who did not collapse under difficulty. He had held the line not because he was hard, but because some lines, once crossed, needed to be held. The screen door opened behind him. Dad, there's steam. Is that right? Should I add the powder now? Yes, now, he said. Stir it right in. Okay. He stood up. He went inside. He pulled the door, closed behind him, gently, the way you close something you have read all the way through and understood completely and have no need to open again.